Hi, this is Ann with the Learn and Grow Educational Series, and this is another episode of Food for Thought. And our topic today is the basics of self-watering container gardening. And of course, our whole program was originally built around self-watering container gardening, but things have changed over the years, and it's a time for a refresh. Not everybody is familiar with our history. So for those of you who are new to us, this is an introduction to the foundation of our curriculum. For those of you who have been with us for a while, this may be a refresher, or you might learn something new that you didn't already know from before. So either way, this is information that we're bringing to you. This is also content that comes from our Meetup online classes that we do via Zoom. So the presentation you're going to see in the video is this exact same presentation I've been using in our classes. This is just a pre-recorded version of the same thing that gets presented in the classes. The difference is we don't have a live Q&A session in the pre-recording. So if you do want to do our live classes, by all means, I'll make sure I have the links for all of that down below. But if you're not able to make the meetups and you just want the information just right now, here in the moment, instant gratification style, you can just get the information now. You don't need to wait until our next class to get that information. So I'm here sweltering in the Learn and Grow Virtual Sustainability Learning Center and Test Garden. This is where we do our online and in-person instruction. Our in-person instruction is done through AirBnB Experiences, and I'll have links for that below as well. We have tours as well as classes. But today's topic is specific to the self-watering containers, and so I'm just going to get straight into it. So first, I want to give you a little background of the Learn and Grow Educational Series and how it came to be. I actually created the Learn and Grow Educational Series in 2013 during my final semester of grad school. I had gone back in my 40s to get my master's degree and finished it in 2013. And in my last semester, I had to do this class called Instructional Design, where you take a lesson plan and you turn it into a product. So as opposed to just a one-time thing you do in a classroom with a bunch of students, this could be like a training manual. It could be something that you actually sell. The professor that was teaching our class used to work for Leapfrog Learning. So, this was all about taking instructional concepts and turning it into something that can reach a much broader audience than perhaps just a classroom full of regular students in a regular school situation. And so I had just started my own self-watering container garden in my patio of my apartment that I had at the time. I still had my daughter living with me. She was a teenager at the time. She's now grown and married. But at the time, it was me and my kid. And this was about a single mom trying to make sure there was food on the table while going to grad school. So, and we were living in an apartment. We didn't have that much space. We couldn't put anything into the ground. And so that's what got me started on this journey with the self-watering containers. And when given the opportunity to create curriculum around a concept, I was like, oh, this is it. This is what I want to teach other people to do. Because we already have a nonprofit organization devoted to education issues. I'm like, well, if I'm going to do this for a grade, I'm going to do it for real. And so that's how Learn and Grow got started. And it was all around the self-watering container gardening thing, which is a non-proprietary technological approach to gardening. It's been around for decades now. It is rumored to have started in Greenwich Village on fire escapes as a way to allow city dwellers to garden, an urban gardening hack from back in the day. And so we're just going to get into this, and I'm going to show you how it all works. But this is important for renters who might need to move and not be able to put a garden in the ground, but also might need to take it with them when they move. I'm sitting here, and in fact, let me turn off the graphics, and you can see behind me, that's a chicken house. But if you kind of lean around, you can see that we've got all kinds of stuff here in the garden, and everything's growing pretty much in self-watering containers. So there's the garden. You can kind of see around me. There in the far back, you can see over my shoulder right over here, that's our vermiculture composter right there. It was full of earthworms, lovely compost, and all kinds of garden kitchen scraps. And so turning it into compost for the garden. We're doing not just the self-watering container gardening, but we've expanded our curriculum to include the backyard chicken care, as well as sustainable living practices. And in fact, I'm going to pivot. Here over my shoulder is our tent yurt. That is my office space, she shed. But it's also my shelter in place location here in my background, because my housemate works with elderly people who are fragile and with all the diseases running around that could potentially endanger them. And because I do go into the public schools and get exposed to things that might be unsafe if it were conveyed over, even though we are both vaccinated and boosted out the yin-yang. We don't want to be asymptomatic carriers, turn into typhoid Marys and carry some god-awful disease into someone's home. And so what this has done is created an opportunity back here for me in this back corner of the yard to be able to demonstrate what I've been teaching and preaching for the last several years through Learn and Grow. I'm actually able to put my money where my mouth is. And so you will see from our other online content that speaks to the other things that we teach. We've got a system here that works really, really well. And, and we've got all this dialed in. And so I'm not going to belabor the sustainability stuff because that's a different conversation. But the water conservative nature of the self-watering containers lends them to the fact that you can recycle used food safe buckets from restaurants and delis to make your container garden. You've got recycling and water conservation automatically right there. And so that's a huge part of sustainability, as is the organic gardening methods we're using, because we're not using any kind of chemicals or, chemical pesticides or anything like that. Everything is natural out there. So we're not just teaching sustainability, we're teaching food security. So for people who are apartment dwellers who might need to be able to grow their own food, because let's just face it, our supply chains are not as stable as we'd like to think they are. And being dependent upon the commercialized food supply for survival seems a little risky when everybody's perfectly capable of growing at least something on their own. That even if you're not going to replace everything you buy at the grocery store, if you can grow enough of the right things to hold you over, come what may, for whatever reasons the grocery stores are empty, if you still have things that are going to allow you to get by, that can supplement what you're currently buying at the store, but are there as a backup in case the store no longer is available to you for whatever reasons, then you're just that much better off. You're less dependent upon what started out as a convenience and has now become how people survive, which is scary. And so we're trying to restore knowledge amongst the human species about how to grow your own food, because that's just, used to be just part of being alive. And now people don't know anymore. And there's no reason not to. There's all kinds of health benefits that come from gardening, not just from the quality of the food that you eat, but also from the experience of gardening. So, which is a whole nother conversation unto itself. But also, it's not just about the supply chain thing. I mean, natural disasters and things like that, to be able to have access to food when bad things happen, come what may. I mean, that's really what we're about. And I don't want to say that we're like into the whole prepper thing. I don't have anything against people who label themselves as preppers, but the term has become very much associated with white nationalist domestic terrorism, and that the people who lean in that direction, who are preparing for Armageddon, that it's not just that they're prepping with food and all that kind of stuff. They've also got weapons and all this other scary stuff. That's not us. We're like on the hippie side of, no, kumbaya. We just need to be able to live sustainably. And but nonetheless, this goes to something that's really critically important that I think is really huge for Learn and Grow to communicate with people. It doesn't matter what your political beliefs are. It does not matter what side of the aisle you're on or whatever. We're not getting into the middle of that because, quite frankly, it's kind of silly. It's people fighting over non-issues while the real issues go unaddressed, because you've got so many people creating distractions so that the majority is not looking at where the real problems are. And we're looking at where the real problems are. And regardless of your belief system, everybody's got to eat. And so regardless of what side you lean to in terms of whether you identify as a prepper or you're more of just a hippy-dippy kumbaya, it really doesn't matter. Everybody's got to eat. And it's one of those great equalizers that makes us all remember that, we really are all cut from the same cloth. And regardless of what thoughts may be running through our heads, we're all still human beings, and we all have the same needs, and we all have to look out for each other, or as a species, we're not going to survive. And so that's what our curriculum is really hoping to do, is we're going to take all those arguments out, because there is no argument about whether or not people need to eat. That's just a given. And so we start there. That's the one commonality that all human beings have. And then we can start building consensus on other issues around that. So that's where we're coming at this with respect to food security just being a critical issue for everybody, regardless of your political leaning. So understanding the science of how these self-watering containers work is really important, because not everybody has access to the exact same materials that we're using here in the garden. And that's something that we've become painfully aware of over the years. But here's the thing. If you understand how it works, you can figure out a hack of your own to make the same thing happen using different materials. You just got to understand how it works. So I'm going to show you how it basically works from a physics standpoint. And then whatever you want to do in terms of whether you're going to do a total DIY thing where you MacGyver it yourself, or you're going to use a kit, because I'm going to show you a kit option as well. so long as you make it happen for yourself, you're going to be using about 1/10 of the amount of water as growing in ground, if you're doing it correctly. And you're going to have a portable garden that, even if you're never going to relocate it to another location, let's say that the sun plays across your yard in dramatically different ways, or your patio or your balcony or your rooftop, depending on the time of the year. And so you need to position your plants so that they get the right light for their growing needs, depending on the season that it is. Well, if it's in a bucket, you can move it around. So, and if you grow something one season and then you grow something else the next season in the same container, but the lighting requirements are different, there's nothing that stops you from moving that container to a better lit spot or a better shaded spot, depending on the light needs of the plant that you're growing at the moment. And so that's another benefit of being able to do it in containers. So all sub-irrigation systems have a water reservoir below, a growing chamber above, and some mechanism that allows water to absorb and percolate and go upward in some kind of wicking mechanism that draws the moisture up into the soil where the roots of your plants are. But it doesn't saturate the soil. And if for whatever reasons, like out here in the garden, if it rains, which we're in the middle of a drought, so whatever, but if it were to hypothetically rain here, then the rain would go, soak into the soil. And if the soil becomes too saturated with rainwater, gravity's going to pull that excess water out just because of the sheer weight of it and drain through the drain holes down into the reservoir. And then all of the reservoirs in our containers have an overflow. So if a drain hole. So if the reservoir gets too full, then the excess will drain out to the ground. And I guess that's wasted water in that sense, but it's not going to flood your plants. It's not going to flood the growing chamber, and your plants are not going to get root rot because they've got drainage and down into that reservoir. So if you can see in these illustrations here, you've got the little watery bit down below. You've got some kind of wicking mechanism that sticks down into the water, and then it pulls the water up into your container. And so these are the two different kinds I'm going to show you here. So the total DIY version, you've got to have power tools. You have to buy PVC. You have to buy an atrium tray or something to be your wicking basket. And you have to have the tools for it. If you're going to go with the kit that I'm going to show you in a minute, you really don't need much in the way of tools. You only need a single bucket to make one growing container, because the kit will create that false bottom in the reservoir, and I'll show you that in a minute. But when you're doing the total DIY version, it's a bucket within a bucket system, so you need 2 buckets to make one container, and plus the additional parts and the tools and everything. Now, I strongly recommend, and I constantly advise people, I would much rather see you get your buckets used from restaurants, delis, bakeries, cafeterias, places like that. Any place that's getting commercialized food supplies in 5-gallon buckets. They have to be food safe, and so automatically that they're food safe. But what they do is they get all these commercial food supplies in these 5-gallon plastic buckets, and then they throw them in the dumpster. And then it becomes plastic in a landfill. And these are food safe plastic buckets that are single use if done this way. Talk about single use plastics. And then if you have to go buy a bucket at the store, you're looking anywhere from $5 to $9 for what somebody else is just throwing in the trash. So if you can go reclaim those buckets from the restaurants before they end up in the dumpster, then 1, you're saving yourself $5 to $9 a bucket, and 2, you're keeping plastic out of a landfill. So we always encourage that. So let's take a little bit closer look at the total DIY version. And I'm going to use a real life model right here, because I think this is way easier than trying to do it with the lame-o diagrams that I tried to draw for my presentation. So right here you will see is the drain hole. Now this drain hole, it falls about a 1/4 inch below the bottom of this upper bucket, because you've got a bucket within a bucket system here. You need about a 1/4 inch of air, a gap, between the hole and the underside of the upper container, because you have to give it enough space for water to drip down into the reservoir. It can't be sitting directly into it. There's got to be a layer of air in between the top of the water and the underside of the growing chamber, so that there's space for water to drip down. So let me show you how we've accomplished this. This is what I standardize on. Now, I will preface this by saying that when I watched all the 89 million hippie YouTube videos on how to do this, when I very first got started in 2013, A lot of the guys that I was seeing on YouTube, and it was all dudes, were using deli containers like potato salad and coleslaw and things come in these little tubs with lids. And rather than throw them away, what they were doing is drilling them up full of holes and then cutting a hole in the underside of the upper chamber of their bucket for that cup to sit in. The problem with that is that means you've got to have a hole saw for every size deli container you might end up using that way because they're not all the same size. And so this is the underside of the growing chamber. You can see you've got drain holes drilled in the bottom. You've got this drain thingy here, which I'll explain in a second. You've got a piece of PVC hanging out here. The PVC, you're going to put your water in here, and it comes out here into this lower bucket, which is acting as your reservoir. If the water gets too high, it'll come out the drain hole. So this is how you know when your bucket is full. If you're putting water in at the top of the tube and water starts to shoot out the hole, you're done because it's not going to hold any more water than that. And then what happens is this wicking basket is dangling down into the water. And when you put your dirt inside, you can see that some of the dirt is going to go into that basket and the rest of it's going to be up above everything where it can have adequate drainage. What's going to happen is that once you've got the dirt in there and you've got water in your reservoir and you've got your plants all planted and everything's just, put together, the water that's already in the soil, the plants are going to absorb that through their roots. That's going to dry the soil out. Now, the way that capillary action, the law of physics that applies here, works is that the water is going to try and fill the empty air gaps in the soil. And water molecules are attracted to each other. They want to glom together to form larger droplets and make one solid body rather than be dispersed. And so all the moisture in the soil is going to be drawn towards each other, and they're going to find it easier to connect with each other in those cracks of air, those little air passages that go up through the soil. And so what happens is by just the rule, it's just the laws of nature, that how absorption works, is that the water is going to percolate upward from that basket that's dangling down into the water and has soil in it. That soil is going to soak up water and it's going to absorb upward into the growing chamber of the planter. And then as the roots draw on the water that's in the soil, it's going to create this natural draw and these pathways through the soil that are going to allow the water to come in as it's needed. But then if there's too much water, the excess is going to drip back down and drain back down into the reservoir. So this basically creates a self-regulating cycle where the plants and the soil and the water are all working in this natural relationship that already happens in nature with each other to do what they already do. And you can't get your soil too wet or too dry that way, that the plants are going to basically dictate how much water is being consumed from the reservoir once they get established. And little seedlings take a little bit before you really have to get crazy with the water in the reservoir. And when you direct seed into the soil, you're still going to want to dampen it, now and again until everything sprouts and gets established. But once those roots are going, you don't have to do that anymore. You don't want to top water after that, because what you'll do is you'll end up leaching the nutrients out of the soil. It'll all drain to the reservoir and become sediment on the floor of the reservoir that never percolates back upward with the water. So you don't want to rinse the nutrition out of your soil down into the reservoir, because there's no guarantee it's going to come back up. If anything, it's just going to create sludge at the bottom of your reservoir and make it all gooey and gross. What you want to do is make sure that when you're watering, always refill through the tube rather than top watering into the soil, unless you're dampening the top of the soil after recently planting seeds and they haven't sprouted yet. Once things have sprouted, leave it alone. Don't touch the soil with the water, generally speaking. Now, if you're doing top watering with like a liquid fertilizer or something like that, then obviously, but you don't want to overwater through the soil. You want to keep going through the tube, and then it just takes care of itself. And what we do also in our containers is we have earthworms, and again, from the composter back here, but gets a big old handful of gooey compost with earthworms in it, in a bucket with all the potting soil and the plants and everything, and it's just glorious. And what the worms will do is they not only create worm castings that additionally fertilize the soil, but they're aerating the soil by squizzling going through. They're creating those air pockets so the water can percolate upward, and they're keeping the soil from settling, compacting to the point that the water can't pass through it anymore. And so we've got a very live ecosystem in every container that way, and a lot of good biota in the container. We also use beneficial nematodes to eat the eggs of insects that lay their eggs in soil. That's another strategy you can use. I'll include links for that below. So the other way to do it is with this kit. Now this bucket is just a regular bucket like the one I just showed you, the difference being that I covered this one in decorative contact paper. So this is just so it doesn't look like a plain old paint bucket sitting out in the garden. Once your plants get established, the buckets themselves kind of get lost in the mix, but because the plants are really the eye-catching part of it. But if you really, especially when you've got a new garden started and it looks kind of naked and bare and you don't want it to look so, then you can do something like this. But what I did was using the kit, it also has to have a drain hole, which is a little bit higher because this is working a little bit differently in terms of design. It does exactly the same thing, but how it does it is different. And so the hole is still higher, but you still have to have a drain hole. Now the thing here is that you only have one bucket because the kit creates the bottom. That the second bucket, the top bucket created in the other system where you had to have drain holes and all that kind of stuff. Here you've got drain holes. You've got all kinds of drainage built into this. So this is a really neat little thing. So here's how this works. It has a few added features that the DIY version obviously is not going to have. First of all, you only need to drill one hole, and you don't even have to drill it. I did it with a little mini blowtorch, getting the tip of a Phillips head screwdriver super hot, and then just poked a hole in. And so you don't have to have all kinds of tools to do the kit. So if you don't have hole saws, if that's like not your bag and you don't want to have to figure all of that out, this is like infinitely easier. And price-wise, it's about the same, even possibly less, depending on whether you're buying your buckets new or if you're, it just depends on the cost of your materials, depending on how you do it. So, but again, links all below. So what you have here, first of all, is this platform. And this is called a Grow Bucket Kit. And so you've got this platform, and this piece of it, this is going to face right where the hole is on the outside. Because if you turn it, dirt is going to be between the side of this thing on the outside of it here and the inside wall of the bucket, because there's going to be a gap of space here. And if you have the drain hole and right where the dirt is, then the dirt's going to clog. It's not going to work right. So you want to have the drain hole right in front of this so that's not obstructed by anything. So then this platform, if you look at it, you can see it's got all these ridges. What this does is when you put it in the bucket, and you can see that it's at a slope here. So the bucket's going to be here, and then you can see that there's this crevice where the soil is going to be able to go between the side of the bucket on the outside and the side of the platform on the inside. And then you've got these ridges. What happens is water, once you fill this up underneath, and we'll get to that part, but once the reservoir down below is filled with water, it's going to seep out from underneath these ridges into the soil. So when you put this in the bucket, you can see you've got this space in between where the soil's going to go. So that's that. Then you've got this hole right here where we're going to connect the tube to, and then here's the drain hole right on the outside there. Then you put your tube in, and this is just like the PVC, that this is your refill tube. But what makes this awesomer, so much awesomer, is that you've got this flotation device water gauge that tells you how high or low the water level is in the reservoir. And that's something you're not going to get with any DIY version that I've seen so far. So, I'm sure I could MacGyver something roughly equivalent, but it would probably cost more in just me farting around with it to figure it out than it costs us to buy the kit. But you've got this flotation device. And what I like about this water gauge, and if you see our other videos, our colleague Isabel, who has helped us with doing our Spanish language content, but she also helped us do a universal design video about how this supports her as a person who has a significant vision loss and a visual impairment. And so she likes this because she can feel the notches with her fingertips and feel how tall this is standing up in the thing. Because as a blind person, her being able to position a hose at the top of that PVC and then monitor the hole for water coming out when it's full, for someone with vision loss, that's like really, really super challenging. It's like totally not worth it for her to try and figure it out, how to do it by touch, or all the different ways that she's trying to make it work for herself. This is a whole different universe because now she can monitor it tactily with this water gauge. And so that wasn't the reason why, the Grow Bucket folks necessarily did that. It just turned out that it worked out that way. And it's really a very, if you have intact vision, you can see this bright green thing from from across your yard or whatever, and you can just look at it and know whether you need to top off your water or not, because it's going to drop down lower as the water level goes down. And when it's full, it's going to be raised all the way up. So this I love. And then it comes with labels that you can stick right here to label, what you're growing. But again, you still got the drainage. So excess water that's in the soil, because you're going to fill all of this with soil once, it gets all going. You'll get this filled up, and you put your plants in here, and then you fill up the water, same as the other one. And it's going to do exactly the same thing, just in a different way. So with the DIY version, what's happening is the water is coming up from the center through that drain and then draining down back to the drain holes to the reservoir as needed. Whereas if you look at the Grow Bucket kit, the water's coming around from the perimeter of the bucket. It's coming up from around the sides rather than up through the center. But it's all doing exactly the same thing. What you want is your soil able to stick its toes into the water and absorb water upward, but still have that upper area where with the drainage, so that if the soil becomes too saturated, the excess can still drain down into the reservoir and be held there until it's really needed. And because that little drain hole on the outside is really so small, and the gap, that air gap in there really isn't that huge between the underside of the growing chamber and the top of the water beneath it in the reservoir, you've just got a little tiny layer of air. You're not losing water to evaporation that way, because there's just not that much of an opportunity for it. Most of your water is going to be consumed by your plants, and how fast that happens just depends on the weather and the type of plants you're growing and how thirsty they are. So that's just something to bear in mind that way. That, but again, it's a tenth of the amount of water is growing in ground on, as little as a tenth. It can be more than that depending on what you're growing, but generally speaking. And the reason why is because when you're planting in the ground and you water things, you lose so much water that just soaks into the earth and goes away, and it's not staying near your roots. And that the roots lose the water. So you've got to put more water in the ground than your plant actually needs to account for the loss. So you don't have that here. You don't have that in a self-watering container. There's no opportunity for that loss to occur. And any water that drains out of the soil because it was too saturated at the time just goes down to the reservoir and waits until later, and then eventually it'll get reabsorbed back up. So you're not losing anything. And so that's a huge consideration, especially if you're dealing with drought conditions, which a lot of us are these days. So here's the bits and pieces to a total DIY version. You can see you start out with drilling the two big holes, and then you move to the drain holes on the underside of your growing chamber. And then you've got to put your outside drain hole on your outside bucket, your lower bucket. And then this is the atrium drain. And really, you will see these in parking lots or like Target or whatever, some shopping center somewhere. And you look in the landscaping, and they've got drainage built in so that when it rains, the landscaping in the parking lot doesn't flood. Well, you will see these things sticking up out of the landscaping like this, right over the drains. And what this does is it prevents leaves and wood chips and mulch and stuff to go down into the drainage system and clog it up. That way, only water is draining off of a parking lot. You're not having a bunch of stuff going down to the pipes and then blocking it, which would just be wretched. So it's a very, very clever device. However, we are using it like this as our wicking basket for our self-watering containers, because you've got this big fat lip around the side of it that will catch. And so what I'm doing is I'm using a 3.5 inch hole saw. I think this is a 3-inch atrium drain, or is this a 4? I can't recall. But 3 or 4 inch atrium drain, because this part of it is narrower than this part. And what you really want is something that's going to fit through that hole, but it's going to have a wide enough of a lip that it's going to catch so that it can't go all the way through. You can see the size of the hole that was cut. And then you can see, here's where you can't go all the way through. And then on the inside, you can see how that goes. So the weight of your plants in the soil is not going to reach it and push it through. You have to have enough of a catch right there. You have to have enough of a rim for that lip to catch on. So you can't cut the hole too big. But it needs to be big enough for the baskety part to drop down. And so rather than buy 45 different hole saws for every kind of size deli container I could possibly recycle, I just standardized on a single hole saw and use the atrium drains. because, you know, if you're going to do bunches of containers, and out here at this point, I'm up to 61 buckets. I'm up to 61 containers. Some of them are Grow Bucket kits and some of them are the old school. Most of them the old school because I started them years ago before Grow Bucket was even around. Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense because wholesales are expensive. I mean, you're looking easily $15 a pop. And I'm not going to buy a $15 tool to cut a hole once in my life. That's just not going to happen. So I would rather standardize on a single size, and that's why I went to atrium drains. But there's nothing that obligates you to do it that particular way. That's just how we did it. So here's the Grow Bucket kits, and we have these on our online store, which I'll have links to all of that stuff below. We are a nonprofit organization. Our instruction is provided for free. And so the affiliate revenue that we generate from our online store, which is really an Amazon store, but all of the products that we use out here, because we use Amazon, you know, as a source for some of our stuff out here, quite a bit of our stuff out here, actually. We've already done the research and figured it all out. And so rather than you have to go and reinvent the wheel and start from square one, logically, you'll see, you know, why the things we're using make sense in the context that we're using them. And so a lot of the tools that we have here out in the garden and in the Learning Center, we also have available for other people to purchase for themselves through our Amazon store on our site. So I'll make sure you have links to all of that down below. And then other resources that we have. Here are some links. These are links directly to the Grow Bucket kits, also links for our Airbnb classes. You can see our Instagram at Bucket Gardening. We also have one for the Learn and Grow Educational series. So all of our social media links I'll have below. You can see this is our website. So all this stuff and more will appear in the links down below. That's the presentation part of this. So if you have questions about any of this, then certainly post comments to this video. You can direct message us on any of our socials about any questions that you have. And again, all the links to all that stuff will be down below. And we really hope that you found this informative and helpful. And certainly avail yourself of the other content that we have online to also inform yourself and broaden your knowledge of these things and take advantage of the work that we've already done to figure this stuff out. Yeah, and just let us know if you have questions. We appreciate any comments and feedback you might have. We really appreciate, you know, any sharing of our content that you do with others who you think might benefit from the content that we're teaching. So thanks so much again for coming back to our videos if you're a repeat viewer, and if you're new to us, thanks for coming here for the first time, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Thanks so much.